My name is Sienna Cortez, 26 years old and a combat engineer in the United States Army. I never thought my military service would be questioned at my own grandmother's will reading. But there stood Daniel, my brother, pointing his finger at me. "She's a fake soldier," he declared loudly in front of the entire courtroom. What Daniel failed to notice was my lawyer quietly slipping a sealed envelope to the judge. As the judge read its contents, his face went pale. "Officers, seal this court immediately. Before I tell you how that envelope changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happened next. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. March 15, 2023. I'm stepping off that plane at Dallas-Fort Worth, duffel bag over my shoulder, expecting. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a hug from my mom. Maybe my dad asking how I was doing. Hell, maybe even my brother Daniel acknowledging I existed. Instead, I got Daniel's signature smirk and the words that still burn in my chest: "Look who's back from playing soldier. Not welcome home. Not glad you're safe. Playing soldier." My mom, Helena, just laughed it off like she always did. "Oh Daniel, stop teasing your sister." But her eyes never left her phone. Dad, Miguel, he gave me this awkward pat on the back, mumbled something about dinner being ready, and disappeared into the kitchen. You want to know what hurts more than dodging mortars overseas? Coming home to people who act like you just got back from summer camp. That first dinner was brutal. Daniel dominated the conversation, talking about his latest case, his new BMW, his promotion to senior partner. Mom hung on every word like he was delivering the evening news. When I tried to mention anything about my deployment, Daniel would cut me off. "Sienna, nobody wants to hear about fixing trucks in the desert." Fixing trucks. That's what he called it. See, Daniel had this talent for making everything I did sound small. When I graduated basic training, he told people I went to military boot camp for a few weeks. When I got my engineering certification, he said I learned some technical stuff. When I deployed to Afghanistan, suddenly I was just working maintenance overseas. The worst part? My parents believed him. Or maybe they just found it easier to go along with his version of reality. 3 weeks after I got home, I'm at the bank trying to get a VA home loan. It's supposed to be straightforward: I served, I qualified, done deal. But the loan officer, this middle-aged guy named Peterson, keeps looking at my paperwork like something doesn't add up. Finally, he leans forward and says, "Miss Cortez, I have to ask, your brother Daniel spoke with me last week. He mentioned your military service might be overstated?" My blood went cold. What exactly did he say? He just suggested I should verify everything carefully. Said you tend to exaggerate your experiences for sympathy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Peterson by his cheap tie and show him every scar, every sleepless night, every memory that still made me jump when a car backfired. Instead, I kept my voice steady. "Sir, everything in that file is accurate. My service record speaks for itself." But the damage was done. Peterson spent the next 2 hours putting me through verification hell. Questions about my deployment dates, my unit, my duties. Like I was some kind of fraud trying to game the system. I walked out of that bank feeling smaller than I had since middle school. Daniel had reached his hand into my future and crushed it, just because it could. That night, I confronted him. Mom and Dad were watching TV in the living room when I cornered Daniel in the kitchen. "Why did you call Peterson?" He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Just shrugged and kept making his protein shake. Someone has to keep you grounded in reality, Sienna. You can't go through life trading on some inflated war story. Inflated? I served 18 months in the motor pool. Changing oil and rotating tires. Let's not pretend you were kicking down doors and saving lives. I stood there, shaking with rage, and he just smiled. That same condescending smile he'd been giving me since we were kids. The one that said, "I'm smarter, I'm more important, and everyone knows it." From the living room, I could hear Mom laughing at some sitcom. Dad was probably already half asleep in his recliner. Neither of them cared that their son was systematically destroying their daughter's credibility. That's when I realized Daniel wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my enemy. And enemies, well, sometimes they underestimate what you're capable of. If you've ever had a family member sabotage your dreams, drop a comment below. Trust me, this story is just getting started, and Daniel has no idea what's coming for him. You need to understand something about my family. We weren't just dysfunctional, we were a perfectly orchestrated show where Daniel was always the star and I was the understudy who never got called to stage. It started when we were kids. Daniel was 6 years older, which meant he got a 6-year head start on being perfect. By the time I could walk, he was already Mom's little lawyer, arguing his way out of chores and into extra allowance. Dad would beam with pride every time Daniel brought home an A, but when I did the same thing, it was just expected. Of course Sienna got good grades, Mom would say to her friends. She has Daniel to look up to. Even my achievements belonged to him somehow. The pattern got worse as we got older. Daniel's high school graduation was this huge celebration, extended family, fancy dinner, speeches about his bright future. When I graduated valedictorian 3 years later, Mom made a nice dinner and Daniel spent the whole time talking about his college classes. Sienna's doing well too, Dad mentioned once during dessert. She's following in Daniel's footsteps, Mom replied automatically. Following his footsteps. Like I was some kind of shadow trailing behind the real person. When Daniel got into law school, you'd think he discovered the cure for cancer. Mom called everyone she knew. Dad bought champagne. They hung his acceptance letter on the refrigerator like a shrine. When I enlisted, the reaction was different. The military? Mom's voice went up 3 octaves. Sienna, why would you want to do that when you could go to college like Daniel? Because I want to serve my country. But you're so smart. You could be anything. A lawyer like your brother, maybe. There it was again. Everything I chose was measured against what Daniel had already done. Dad was quieter about it, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Not because military service was bad, but because it wasn't what Daniel would choose. And in our family, Daniel's choices were the gold standard. The day I left for basic training, Daniel was home from law school for the weekend. The whole family drove me to the recruiting station, well, Mom and Dad drove. Daniel rode along making jokes. I still can't believe you're doing this, he said as we pulled into the parking lot. It's like you're allergic to taking the easy path. Maybe I don't want the easy path. Right. You want the path that gets you shot at for minimum wage. Mom laughed nervously. Daniel, don't say things like that. But he wasn't joking. He genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would choose difficulty when comfort was available. Why anyone would choose service when success was an option. At the recruiting station, the goodbye was awkward. Mom cried and made me promise to call every week. Dad hugged me tight and whispered, "Make us proud," which somehow felt more like pressure than encouragement. Daniel shook my hand like we were business associates. Try not to get yourself killed out there, Sienna. Mom would never forgive you. I should have known then that he saw my military service as an inconvenience to the family narrative, not a source of pride. While I was in basic training, Daniel graduated law school. While I was learning to disarm explosives, he was passing the bar exam. While I was deployed overseas, he was making partner at a prestigious firm. Every phone call home was the same. Mom would ask how I was doing, then spend 20 minutes talking about Daniel's latest achievement. Dad would give me updates on Daniel's cases, Daniel's salary, Daniel's new apartment. Your brother's doing so well, became Mom's favorite phrase. And me? I was just the daughter who chose the hard way for no good reason. When I came home from deployment, nothing had changed except that Daniel's success had grown even bigger, casting an even longer shadow. My military service wasn't an achievement in their eyes, it was a detour from the real path, the Daniel path. But here's what my family never understood: sometimes the person in the shadow is the one learning to fight. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, let me know in the comments. Because this story gets a lot more interesting when the invisible daughter finally steps into the light. October 12, 2023. The day my grandmother's lawyer dropped a bomb that blew our family apart. Grandma Rosa had been sick for months, but nobody expected her to go so suddenly. One day she's telling me stories about my grandfather's military service, the next day Mom's calling to say she passed in her sleep. The funeral was typical family theater. Daniel gave this beautiful eulogy about how Grandma Rosa shaped our values and taught us the meaning of family. Mom sobbed dramatically in the front row. Dad sat stone-faced, nodding along. I stayed quiet in the back, remembering the woman who used to slip me $20 bills and whisper, "Don't tell your parents, but I'm proud of what you're doing, Mija." She was the only one who ever asked real questions about my service. Not when are you coming home, or is it dangerous, but are you making a difference, and are you taking care of yourself? 3 days after the funeral, we're all sitting in this sterile conference room at Morrison, Klein and Associates. The lawyer, Mr. Morrison, is this ancient guy with thick glasses who knew Grandma Rosa for 40 years. Daniel's checking his phone every 30 seconds. Mom's already planning how to split up Grandma's jewelry. Dad's just staring at the table, probably thinking about work. Me? I'm thinking about the last conversation I had with Grandma Rosa, 2 weeks before she died. Sienna, she'd said, grabbing my hand with her shaky fingers, your family doesn't see your worth yet. But I do. I've always seen it. Morrison clears his throat and starts reading. Most of it's standard stuff. The house goes to Mom, some savings get split between family members, personal items distributed according to her wishes. Then he gets to the section that changed everything. And finally, I leave the sum of $300,000 in trust, to be awarded to the grandchild who has served this nation with honor and distinction. The room went dead quiet. Daniel looked up from his phone, confusion all over his face. I'm sorry, what was that last part? Morrison repeated it, slower this time. The grandchild who has served this nation with honor and distinction. That would be. He looked directly at me. Sienna Cortez. You could have heard a pin drop. Daniel's mouth literally fell open. Mom's face went white. Dad shifted in his chair like someone had shocked him. Wait, Daniel said, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. There has to be some mistake. No mistake, Morrison replied calmly. Rosa was very specific about this provision. She updated the will 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Right after I'd told Grandma Rosa about Daniel sabotaging my VA loan application. But I don't understand, Mom stammered. Daniel's the successful one. He's the lawyer, he's established, he's not a veteran, Morrison finished. The way Daniel's face changed in that moment. I'd never seen him look so shocked, so angry, so completely out of control. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Sienna barely saw any action. She fixed vehicles for 18 months and came home. That's not serving with honor and distinction, that's barely serving at all. There it was. The same dismissive attitude he'd always had, but now it wasn't just hurting my feelings, it was costing him $300,000. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Are you questioning your sister's military service, Mr. Cortez? I'm questioning whether changing oil in Afghanistan qualifies as distinguished service, yes. The room temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Mom jumped in, trying to smooth things over like she always did. What Daniel means is, we're all proud of Sienna, but $300,000 is a lot of money. Maybe there's room for interpretation? Rosa was very clear, Morrison said firmly. The money goes to the grandchild who served in the military. That's Sienna. I finally found my voice. I accept Grandma Rosa's decision. Daniel whipped around to stare at me. Just like that? You're not even going to discuss it with the family? What's to discuss? Grandma made her choice. Based on incomplete information, Daniel shot back. If she really knew what your service consisted of, she might have made a different decision. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Daniel wasn't going to let $300,000 walk away without a fight. And knowing my brother, he was going to fight dirty. Within 48 hours of that will reading, Daniel had transformed from my annoying older brother into a full-scale enemy combatant. He started subtle. Phone calls to relatives, just checking in after Grandma's funeral. But every conversation somehow circled back to the inheritance. I just think it's unfair to the whole family, I heard him telling our Aunt Carmen. $300,000 could help everyone if it were distributed properly. Then came the not-so-subtle approach. Sienna, Mom called me Thursday morning, Daniel thinks you should consider sharing the inheritance. You know, for family harmony. Family harmony. That was Mom's favorite phrase whenever Daniel wanted something. The will was pretty clear, Mom. But honey, Daniel has student loans from law school. And you don't even have a mortgage or car payments. You could afford to be generous. Generous. With my own inheritance. From a grandmother who specifically chose to honor my military service. Did Daniel put you up to this call? Silence. Then, we just want what's best for everyone. By Friday, Daniel had escalated to direct confrontation. He showed up at my apartment with takeout Chinese food and that fake concerned expression he used to wear when he wanted something as a kid. We need to talk about this inheritance situation, he said, setting the food on my kitchen counter like he lived there. No, we don't. Sienna, be reasonable. Grandma Rosa was 92 years old. She probably didn't fully understand the implications of what she was doing. She understood perfectly. Did she? Because I've been looking into your military records, and honestly, your service was pretty routine. Vehicle maintenance, basic engineering work. Nothing that screams honor and distinction. My blood pressure spiked. You've been looking into my military records? Public information. And what I found was underwhelming. He pulled out a folder, because of course Daniel brought evidence to ambush me in my own home. 18 months deployment. Mechanical engineering unit. No combat decorations, no special commendations. Pretty standard support role stuff. Support roles keep soldiers alive, Daniel. I'm not saying they're worthless. I'm saying they're not worth $300,000 that could actually make a difference in this family. The audacity of this man. Make a difference for who? You. For everyone. Mom and Dad are getting older, they could use financial security. I've got loans that you chose to take on for your fancy law degree. My law degree that actually contributes to society. And there it was. The truth he'd been dancing around for years. Daniel genuinely believed his career mattered more than mine, his choices were smarter than mine, his life was more valuable than mine. Get out. Sienna. Get out of my apartment. Now. He stood up slowly, gathering his folder like it was some kind of holy document. This doesn't have to get ugly, he said. But if you're going to be selfish about this, don't blame me for what happens next. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Grandma Rosa's will can be contested. And if it goes to court, every detail of your military service is going to come under scrutiny. Every single day you spent overseas, every task you performed, every claim you've ever made about your experience. He paused at my front door. Are you sure you want your service record dissected in front of a judge? Because I am. After he left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the Chinese food he'd brought. Sweet and sour pork, my favorite as a kid. He'd remembered, even while he was threatening to destroy me. That's when I realized Daniel wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for the family hierarchy he'd spent 32 years building. The structure that put him at the top and me at the bottom. $300,000 was just the excuse. The real war was about whether Daniel Cortez would remain the golden child, or whether his little sister had finally earned something he couldn't take away. But here's what Daniel didn't know, I'd been in real wars. And I'd learned that sometimes, the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. November 3, 2023. The morning that changed everything arrived in a manila envelope slipped under my apartment door. Petition to contest last will and testament of Rosa Maria Santos. Daniel had actually done it. He'd hired lawyers and filed papers and turned our family drama into a legal war. I read through the document 3 times, each pass making me angrier than the last. His argument was brutal and calculated, designed to destroy not just my inheritance claim, but my entire military reputation. Petitioner contests the bequest on grounds that the beneficiary's military service does not meet the standard of honor and distinction as intended by the deceased. Evidence will show that Sienna Cortez served in a support capacity with minimal exposure to combat situations, and has misrepresented the nature and significance of her deployment to family members. Misrepresented. He was calling me a liar in legal documents that would become public record. It got worse. Petitioner further alleges that the deceased was influenced by exaggerated accounts of the beneficiary's service, and would not have made this bequest with full knowledge of the actual circumstances of said service. He was claiming Grandma Rosa was too old and confused to know what she was doing. The same woman who beat him at chess 2 weeks before she died. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the end. Court date, December 15th, 6 weeks to prepare for Daniel to publicly humiliate me in front of a judge. I called Morrison, Grandma's lawyer, within an hour. I expected this, he said when I read him the petition. Daniel approached me 3 days after the will reading, asking if I thought Rosa was mentally competent when she made the change. What did you tell him? I told him Rosa Santos was sharper at 92 than most people half her age. And I told him that if he wanted to contest her final wishes, he'd better have a damn good reason. Apparently he thinks he does. Morrison sighed. Sienna, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there anything about your military service that could come back to hurt you in court? Anything Daniel might use against you? That's when I realized I was in trouble. Not because I'd lied about my service, I hadn't. But because I'd never told the whole truth, either. There were parts of my deployment I couldn't talk about. Classified operations that didn't exist in any public record Daniel could access. It's complicated, I said finally. How complicated? Some of my work overseas was classified. I can't discuss the details without clearance. Silence on Morrison's end. Then, that could be a problem. No kidding. See, here's what Daniel didn't understand about military service. The most important missions are often the ones you can never talk about. The operations that don't make it into your public service record. The nights that don't exist in any official document. But in court, what matters isn't what you did, it's what you can prove you did. And I couldn't prove anything about Operation Iron Dusk. That night, I lay awake thinking about that mission. 3 months into my deployment, our unit got orders to secure a suspected IED location outside Kandahar. Intelligence suggested multiple devices, possibly connected to a larger network. We rolled out before dawn, me, Sergeant Blake, and 4 other engineers. What we found was worse than anyone expected. I can't tell you the details, even now. But I can tell you that what I did that morning saved lives. Real lives. American soldiers who went home to their families because I made a choice to put myself between them and an active threat. The commendation is buried in classified files somewhere in Washington. The after-action report is sealed. The people who recommended me for decoration aren't allowed to discuss it publicly. Daniel was about to drag me into court and call me a fraud, and I couldn't even mention the one thing that proved him wrong. Unless there had to be a way to get those records released. Some kind of legal exception for court proceedings. I needed to talk to someone who understood military law, classification levels, and how to navigate the bureaucracy. I needed help from someone Daniel couldn't intimidate or discredit. If you've ever had to fight for recognition you couldn't prove you deserved, let me know in the comments. Because I was about to discover that sometimes, the truth is worth risking everything to defend. December 15, 2023. 9 a.m. Courtroom 4B at the Harris County Civil Court. I'd been in combat zones that felt less terrifying than walking into that room. The gallery was packed. Not just with family, Daniel had somehow turned this into a public spectacle. I spotted neighbors, family friends, people from Mom's church, even some of Dad's coworkers. Everyone wanted front row seats to watch the Cortez family destroy itself. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table in his best suit, flanked by 2 lawyers who probably cost more per hour than I made in a week. He looked confident, prepared, like he was about to argue a case he'd already won. I sat alone with Morrison, who kept whispering reassurances that sounded more nervous than confident. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order, and Daniel's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Hayes, stood up for opening arguments. Your Honor, this case is about truth versus fiction. About a family member who has built a false narrative around ordinary military service, and an elderly woman who was deceived by that narrative into making a decision she would never have made with complete information. She gestured toward me like I was evidence in a criminal trial. We will show that Sienna Cortez served 18 months in a support role, maintaining vehicles and performing routine engineering tasks. While we respect all military service, we must distinguish between service and distinguished service. Between showing up and standing out. My stomach clenched. She was good at this. The deceased, Rosa Santos, believed she was honoring a combat hero. The evidence will show she was actually rewarding someone whose greatest danger overseas was changing a flat tire. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Daniel's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Morrison stood up for our response, and I could tell immediately we were outgunned. Your Honor, Rosa Santos knew exactly who she was honoring. Sienna Cortez served her country with dedication and courage. The will reflects Mrs. Santos' clear intent to recognize that service. Short, simple, and completely inadequate against what Daniel's team was about to unleash. The first witness was Mom. I watched my own mother take the stand and swear to tell the truth, then proceed to destroy me with surgical precision. Helena, did Sienna ever describe her military duties to the family? Hayes asked. She was always very modest about her service. Very quiet. Did she ever claim to have been in combat situations? Not directly, no. But she would sometimes imply things. Can you give us an example? Mom looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not love, not even disappointment. Calculation. Well, she would sometimes get startled by loud noises. Car doors slamming, things like that. She'd say it was from her time overseas. I think my mother interpreted that as more than it was. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Mom was using my PTSD symptoms as evidence that I was a fraud. In your opinion, was your mother easily influenced in her final years? Objection, Morrison called out weakly. I'll allow it, Judge Williams said. My mother loved Sienna very much. Sometimes I think she wanted to believe Sienna's service was more significant than it actually was. Hayes nodded sympathetically. No further questions. Morrison's cross-examination was a disaster. Helena, did Rosa ever express doubt about Sienna's service? No, but... Did she seem mentally competent when you last spoke with her? Yes, but she was always emotional about military service because of my father's war experience. Every answer made things worse. Next came Dad's testimony. Miguel Cortez, the man who'd barely spoken to me in 2 years, now had plenty to say. Miguel, in your observation, how did Sienna describe her military experience to the family? She didn't talk about it much. But when she did, I don't know. It seemed like she was trying to make it sound more important than it was. Can you elaborate? She'd mentioned the danger, the responsibility. But Daniel looked into her records, and it seemed like pretty standard stuff. Dad was using Daniel's research to testify against me. My own father. By lunch recess, I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. The afternoon session would bring character witnesses, people from the community who Daniel had convinced to testify about my pattern of exaggeration. I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a sandwich I couldn't eat, watching my family's betrayal play out in real time. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about Daniel proving, once and for all, that he was the important one. The successful one. The one who mattered. And he was willing to destroy me completely to do it. Have you ever had your own family testify against you? Drop a comment, because the afternoon session was about to get even worse. During the lunch break, I made the most important phone call of my life. Sergeant Blake? It's Sienna Cortez. Naomi Blake had been my squad leader during the most intense months of my deployment. If anyone could help me access classified records, it was her. Cortez. I heard about your situation. Word travels fast in military circles. You heard about the court case? I heard some lawyers been making calls, trying to dig up dirt on Operation Iron Dusk. My blood went cold. Daniel contacted you? Not directly. But he's got investigators working for him, and they've been asking questions. Questions they don't have clearance to ask. This was worse than I thought. Daniel wasn't just attacking my public service record, he was trying to expose classified operations. Sergeant, I need your help. Is there any way to get those records released for court? Maybe. There's a process for declassification in legal proceedings, but it's complicated. Takes weeks, sometimes months. And there's no guarantee they'll approve it. I don't have weeks. The case resumes in 2 hours. Then we need to try something else. Something else turned out to be Naomi Blake driving 4 hours from Fort Hood to appear in my courtroom. I didn't know she was coming until I saw her walk through the courthouse doors at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before court resumed. She was in her dress uniform, ribbons and decorations covering the left side of her chest like a wall of credibility. Thought you could use some backup, she said. Morrison's eyes lit up when I explained who she was. Can she testify about the classified operation? Not about specifics. But she can testify about my character, my performance, my role in the unit. It's not ideal, but it's something. When court resumed, Daniel's team continued their character assassination. They called Peterson from the bank, who testified about my exaggerated claims during the loan application. They called a neighbor who said I seemed to embellish stories for sympathy. Each witness drove another nail into my credibility. Then Morrison stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to call Sergeant Naomi Blake to the stand. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Here was a combat veteran in uniform, walking to the witness stand with the bearing of someone who'd actually been in the fights Daniel's witnesses were claiming I'd avoided. Sergeant Blake, what was your relationship with Sienna Cortez during her deployment? She was assigned to my engineering unit. I was her direct supervisor for the final 8 months of her deployment. How would you characterize her performance? Outstanding. Cortez was one of the most reliable soldiers I've ever worked with. Hayes objected. Your Honor, this is character testimony. It doesn't address the specific claims about distinguished service. I'll allow it, Judge Williams ruled. Morrison continued. Did Specialist Cortez ever participate in combat operations? Naomi looked directly at me, and I saw her making a calculation. How much could she say without violating classification rules? I cannot discuss specific operations due to security restrictions. But I can tell you that Specialist Cortez performed her duties under extremely dangerous conditions. She saved lives. Objection, Hayes called out. The witness is being vague about supposed classified operations that may or may not exist. Your Honor, Morrison replied, Sergeant Blake is following proper protocol for discussing classified military operations. Can you be more specific? Judge Williams asked Naomi. Ma'am, I wish I could. But some operations remain classified for national security reasons. What I can tell you is that Specialist Cortez received commendations that are not part of her public service record. Hayes stood up for cross-examination like a shark smelling blood. Sergeant Blake, isn't it convenient that these supposed heroic acts are all classified and can't be verified? Ma'am, classification isn't about convenience. It's about protecting methods, sources, and ongoing operations. But the jury, the court, is supposed to just take your word for it? You can take the word of someone who was there, or you can take the word of people who've never worn the uniform. The courtroom went quiet. Naomi had just called out everyone who'd testified against me. But I could see it wasn't enough. Judge Williams looked sympathetic but skeptical. Without specifics, without documentation, Naomi's testimony was just another opinion. I needed those classified records. And I was running out of time to get them. Ever felt like the truth was locked away where nobody could reach it? Comment below, because I was about to discover that some doors can be opened if you're willing to risk everything. The evening after Naomi's testimony, my family held an emergency meeting at Mom and Dad's house. I wasn't invited, but Raphael called to warn me it was happening. Sienna, you need to know, they're planning something. Daniel's got everyone convinced you're going to embarrass the whole family. More than they've already embarrassed me? It's different now. Now there's money involved, and Daniel's making this about family loyalty. Family loyalty. The same concept Daniel had been using to manipulate everyone since we were kids. An hour later, Mom called. Sienna, we need to talk. Can you come over? Is Daniel there? Yes, but... Then no. Honey, please. This needs to be resolved as a family. Against my better judgment, I drove over. The scene I walked into felt like an intervention. Daniel sat in Dad's recliner like he was holding court. Mom perched on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. Dad stood by the window, avoiding eye contact. Raphael lingered by the door like he was planning his escape route. Sit down, Sienna, Daniel said. Not asked. Commanded. I'll stand. Fine. We need to discuss your testimony tomorrow. My testimony is none of your business. It becomes my business when you're planning to drag classified military operations into a public courtroom. I stared at him. How do you know what I'm planning? Because I've been doing my homework. I know you filed a request for declassification review. I know you're trying to access records from something called Operation Iron Dusk. How do you? I have connections, Sienna. People who can find out things like this. The room felt like it was shrinking. Daniel had been investigating classified operations. Using his legal connections to pry into military secrets that could get people killed if exposed. You have no idea what you're messing with, I said quietly. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A desperate attempt to justify an inheritance you don't deserve by fabricating some heroic narrative. Fabricating? Mom jumped in before I could explode. What Daniel means is, maybe it's time to think about what's best for the family. This court case is tearing us apart. The court case Daniel started. The court case I had to start, Daniel corrected, because you were being selfish. Dad finally spoke up. Maybe we should consider settling this outside of court. Settling how? I asked. Daniel leaned forward, suddenly all business. Split the inheritance. 50-50. You get 150,000, I get 150,000. Everyone walks away happy. Except Grandma Rosa, who specifically wanted the money to go to the grandchild who served with honor and distinction. Grandma Rosa is dead, Daniel said bluntly. And the living have to deal with the consequences of her decisions. The casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a slap. You know what, Daniel? You're right. Grandma Rosa is dead. Which means she can't see what her family has become. She can't see her son sitting there like a coward while one child destroys the other. She can't see her daughter-in-law choosing money over truth. And she can't see her grandson turning into exactly the kind of person she spent her whole life fighting against. Mom started crying. Sienna, please don't say things like that. Why not? It's true. Grandma Rosa fought fascists in the Philippines during World War II. She knew what real courage looked like. And she'd be ashamed of all of you. Raphael cleared his throat. Actually, I think Sienna's right. Everyone turned to stare at him. About what? Daniel snapped. About Grandma Rosa. She always said the family's honor mattered more than the family's comfort. And this. He gestured around the room. This isn't honorable. Stay out of this, Raphael, Mom warned. No, I'm tired of staying out of it. Sienna's the only one here who actually did something worth respecting, and we're all sitting around trying to take it away from her because Daniel wants money he didn't earn. Daniel's face went red. Money the family could use instead of wasting on someone's inflated sense of importance. That's enough, I said, heading for the door. I'm done with all of you. If you walk out that door, Daniel called after me, don't expect any support tomorrow in court. I turned back one last time. I stopped expecting support from this family a long time ago. Sometimes the people who should have your back are the first ones to stab you in it. Drop a comment if you know what that feels like, because tomorrow was going to determine whether truth or family politics would win. December 16, 2023. The second day of testimony. The day Daniel went too far. I walked into that courtroom knowing my family had abandoned me. What I didn't know was how far Daniel was willing to go to destroy me. The morning session started with more character witnesses, people Daniel had somehow convinced to testify about my pattern of exaggeration. A former coworker who claimed I'd embellished stories about military training. A high school teacher who remembered me as dramatic and attention-seeking. Each testimony felt like another shovel full of dirt on my grave. But Daniel was saving the worst for last. After lunch, Hayes stood up with a thick folder and that predatory smile lawyers get when they think they've won. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Patricia Manning to the stand. I'd never heard the name before, but Morrison's face went pale. Dr. Manning was a clinical psychologist, mid-50s, with the kind of professional demeanor that made everything she said sound like medical fact. Dr. Manning, have you reviewed materials related to this case? Hayes asked. Yes. I was provided with testimony transcripts, family interviews, and publicly available military records. Based on your review, do you have an opinion about the psychological factors that might influence someone to exaggerate their military service? Morrison jumped up. Objection. This witness has never examined my client. Your Honor, Hayes replied smoothly, Dr. Manning is testifying as an expert on veteran psychology and trauma responses, not providing a specific diagnosis. I'll allow it, Judge Williams ruled. My heart started pounding. Dr. Manning, in your professional opinion, what might cause a veteran to embellish their service record? There are several factors. Sometimes veterans who served in support roles experience guilt about not seeing combat. This can lead to what we call valor theft, claiming experiences that belong to others. And how might family dynamics influence this behavior? Veterans who feel overlooked or undervalued may exaggerate their service to gain recognition and sympathy. It's a form of attention-seeking behavior. Hayes nodded like she was taking notes, but I could see she was building to something bigger. Dr. Manning, have you observed cases where veterans fabricate entire classified operations? Objection. Morrison shouted. But the damage was done. The suggestion was out there, that I might have invented Operation Iron Dusk entirely. Sustained, Judge Williams said, but her expression suggested she'd heard enough. Hayes continued the psychological assassination for another 20 minutes, painting me as a desperate attention seeker who'd built my entire identity around fictional heroics. When she finished, Morrison's cross-examination was weak and defensive. Dr. Manning, isn't it true that many legitimate military operations remain classified? Yes, but... And wouldn't a real combat veteran be restricted from discussing classified operations in detail? That's possible, but we must distinguish between legitimate classification and convenient excuses for fabrication. Even our own expert witness was destroying us. Then came Daniel's closing argument. And that's when he crossed every line that had ever existed between us. He stood up, walked to the center of the courtroom, and looked directly at me with pure contempt. Your Honor, this case isn't really about money. It's about truth versus delusion. It's about a family member who has built her entire adult identity around a lie. He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. Sienna Cortez spent 18 months changing oil and fixing generators in Afghanistan. That's not heroic. That's a job. A necessary job, but a job nonetheless. He started pacing, warming up to his performance. But somewhere along the way, she decided that wasn't enough. She decided she needed to be special. So she invented stories. Classified operations that conveniently can't be verified. Heroic actions that mysteriously don't appear in any public record. I watched the jury, the judge, hanging on every word. She convinced our elderly grandmother that she was some kind of war hero. She manipulated a grieving, confused old woman into leaving her life savings to someone based on completely fabricated achievements. The courtroom was dead silent except for Daniel's voice. And when challenged to prove these claims, what does she do? She hides behind classification rules. She brings in a fellow soldier to vouch for mysterious operations that may not even exist. He walked closer to my table, his voice rising. Your Honor, Sienna Cortez isn't just lying to this court. She's not just lying to our family. She's lying to herself. And it's time someone had the courage to stop enabling her delusions. When he sat down, I felt like I'd been publicly executed. The worst part? I could see doubt in Judge Williams' eyes. Daniel's performance had been masterful, devastating, and completely effective. That's when I realized I had one choice left: reveal everything about Operation Iron Dusk, classification be damned. Even if it ended my career, I wasn't going down as a fraud. Ever been accused of lying when you were telling the truth? Comment below, because what happened next changed everything. That night, I made the hardest decision of my military career. I was going to violate classification protocols to save my reputation. I called Naomi at 11 p.m., knowing this conversation might end both our careers. Sergeant, I need to tell the court about Iron Dusk. All of it. Cortez, you can't. You'll face court-martial, criminal charges, maybe prison time. And if I don't, Daniel wins. He destroys me, takes Grandma's money, and proves to everyone that I'm exactly what he's always said I am: worthless. Silence on the other end. Then, there might be another way. What do you mean? I've been making calls all day. Turns out your brother's investigators have been asking questions about Iron Dusk through unofficial channels. Questions that triggered some red flags in Washington. My pulse quickened. What kind of red flags? The kind that get people's attention when civilians start probing classified operations. I may have found someone willing to help. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a 24-hour diner in downtown Houston, across from a man who introduced himself only as Colonel Martinez. He was maybe 50, with gray hair and the kind of steady eyes you only see in people who've made life-and-death decisions. Ms. Cortez, I understand you're in a difficult situation. That's putting it mildly. Your former squad leader has briefed me on Operation Iron Dusk. She also informed me that civilian investigators have been attempting to access classified information related to that mission. He slid a manila envelope across the table. What is this? A declassified summary of your actions during Iron Dusk. Heavily redacted, but sufficient to establish the basics of what happened. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The document was mostly black bars, but what remained was enough. Specialist Sienna Cortez acted with exceptional courage under fire. Disarmed multiple explosive devices. Prevented mass casualties. Recommended for commendation. This is real? As real as it gets. The full operation remains classified, but this summary has been cleared for limited release in legal proceedings. Why are you helping me? Colonel Martinez leaned back in his chair. Because what you did that day saved lives. Because your service deserves recognition, not ridicule. And because civilians have no business investigating classified military operations for personal gain. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom with the envelope in my briefcase and Naomi beside me in full dress uniform. Daniel looked confident, almost smug. He thought he'd destroyed me with yesterday's performance. Morrison stood up for our rebuttal. Your Honor, I'd like to call Sergeant Naomi Blake back to the stand. Hayes objected immediately. Your Honor, this witness already testified. She has new evidence, Morrison replied. Judge Williams allowed it. Naomi took the stand again, but this time she carried herself differently. This time, she had permission to fight back. Sergeant Blake, Morrison began, yesterday you mentioned classified commendations. Do you have any new information about those commendations? Yes, sir. Last night, I was contacted by military personnel who informed me that a summary of Specialist Cortez's actions during Operation Iron Dusk has been declassified for use in these proceedings. The courtroom erupted. Daniel's head snapped up, his confidence evaporating. Morrison approached the witness stand. I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit A. Can you identify this document? Naomi examined the papers. This is an official Department of Defense declassified summary of classified operations conducted in Afghanistan during the relevant time period. Does this document mention Specialist Cortez? It does. It states that Specialist Sienna Cortez acted with exceptional courage under hostile fire, successfully disarmed multiple explosive devices, and prevented mass casualties to friendly forces. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Sergeant Blake, in your professional opinion, do these actions constitute service with honor and distinction? Absolutely. What Specialist Cortez did that day was nothing short of heroic. Hayes jumped up. Objection. How do we know this document is authentic? Colonel Martinez stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, may I approach? Judge Williams looked confused but nodded. I'm Colonel James Martinez, Department of Defense. I can verify the authenticity of that document and provide additional testimony if required. Daniel's face had gone white. His legal team was frantically whispering among themselves. For the first time in 2 days, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was finally out. Have you ever felt the moment when lies crumble and truth stands up? Drop a comment, because Daniel's world was about to collapse completely. Hayes requested an immediate recess, but Judge Williams denied it. The truth train was rolling, and nothing was going to stop it. Colonel Martinez took the stand like he owned the courtroom. Colonel Martinez, can you verify the authenticity of this document? Morrison asked. I can. I personally authorized its declassification yesterday evening after learning that classified operations were being improperly investigated by civilian parties. Hayes tried to object, but Judge Williams cut her off. I'll allow it. Continue, Colonel. Your Honor, what Specialist Cortez did during Operation Iron Dusk was extraordinary by any measure. On October 3, 2022, her unit received intelligence about a complex IED network threatening a major supply route used by coalition forces. The courtroom was dead silent. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the colonel like he was seeing a ghost. Specialist Cortez volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, manually disarming multiple interconnected devices while under enemy observation. The operation required her to remain exposed in hostile territory for over 6 hours. Can you elaborate on the significance of her actions? If those devices had detonated, we estimate 47 American soldiers would have died, with dozens more severely wounded. Specialist Cortez prevented what would have been one of the deadliest attacks on coalition forces in that sector. Morrison nodded. Was she recognized for these actions? She received a classified commendation for valor under fire. The recommendation was for a Bronze Star, but operational security required the recognition to remain sealed. Hayes finally found her voice. Objection. This is all very convenient testimony appearing at the last minute. Colonel Martinez turned toward her with the kind of stare that could melt steel. Ma'am, with respect, there's nothing convenient about declassifying sensitive military operations. This action was taken solely because civilian investigators were improperly attempting to access classified information. Judge Williams leaned forward. Colonel, are you saying the plaintiff's team tried to access classified records? I'm saying that multiple inquiries were made through unofficial channels, inquiries that triggered security reviews and ultimately led to my involvement in this case. Daniel looked like he was going to be sick. Morrison pressed forward. Colonel Martinez, in your professional military opinion, do Specialist Cortez's actions constitute service with honor and distinction? They constitute service above and beyond the call of duty. What Specialist Cortez did that day was nothing short of heroic. Hayes stood up desperately. Your Honor, I request another recess to consult with my client. Denied. Do you have questions for this witness? Hayes approached the witness stand like she was walking to her execution. Colonel Martinez, isn't it unusual to declassify records for a civil proceeding? It's unusual for civilians to probe classified operations for personal financial gain. We responded appropriately. How do we know Specialist Cortez didn't exaggerate her role in this operation? Colonel Martinez's expression turned icy. Ma'am, I've read every after-action report from Iron Dusk. I've interviewed every soldier who was there. If anything, Specialist Cortez has understated her actions, not exaggerated them. Hayes tried a few more questions, but each answer made things worse for Daniel. When Colonel Martinez stepped down, Judge Williams called for closing arguments. Morrison kept it simple. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Sienna Cortez served with exceptional honor and distinction. Rosa Santos knew exactly who she was honoring with her bequest. Hayes looked defeated, but she tried one last attack. Your Honor, convenient declassification aside, this case is about family relationships and an elderly woman's intentions. We ask the court to consider. No, Judge Williams interrupted. This case is about whether Sienna Cortez served with honor and distinction. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that she did. She looked directly at Daniel. Furthermore, I'm concerned about allegations that the plaintiff attempted to improperly access classified military records. I'm referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for investigation. Daniel's lawyers started whispering frantically in his ear. As for the inheritance, Judge Williams continued, Rosa Santos clearly intended to honor military service. Siena Cortez's service was not only honorable and distinguished, it was heroic. The bequest stands as written. The gavel came down with finality. I had one. But looking at Daniel's face, the shock, the rage, the complete inability to process that his little sister had just destroyed him in court, I realized this victory came with a price. I had saved my reputation and secured my inheritance, but I had also ended my relationship with my family forever. Sometimes winning means losing everything else. Because the aftermath was just beginning. The moments after Judge Williams' final ruling felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Daniel sat motionless at his table, staring straight ahead like he couldn't process what had just happened. His legal team was packing up files with the efficiency of people who knew they'd lost badly and wanted to escape quickly. In the gallery, the reactions were mixed. Some people looked stunned. Others seemed almost relieved that the truth had finally come out. Mom was crying quietly. Dad was staring at his hands. Raphael was shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he'd witnessed. I felt empty. Not victorious. Not relieved. Just hollow. Morrison was shaking my hand, saying something about how proud he was, how Rosa would be proud, but his words felt like they were coming from underwater. Colonel Martinez approached me as I gathered my things. Specialist Cortez, you should know that your brother's investigation into classified operations has triggered a formal inquiry. There may be consequences for him. What kind of consequences? That's not for me to say. But civilians who attempt to access classified information for personal gain, well, that's taken very seriously. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we walked out of the courtroom, I found myself face to face with my family in the hallway. Mom rushed up to me, her face streaked with tears. Siena, honey, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, I cut her off. There's a difference. But we're family. We can work through this. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same person who had spent 2 days testifying against me in court. Are we, Mom? Because family doesn't do what you did in there. Dad stepped forward awkwardly. Siena, I made mistakes. We all did. You made choices, Dad. You chose Daniel over me, just like you always have. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. When it mattered, when I needed you to believe in me, you sided with the person calling me a fraud. Daniel finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. Siena, I didn't know about the classified operation. I turned to face him, and for the first time in my life, I saw my older brother as he really was. Not the golden child, not the family success story, but a small, petty man who had spent his whole life putting other people down to make himself feel bigger. You didn't want to know, Daniel. You were so convinced I was worthless that you never considered I might actually be worth something. I was trying to protect the family. You were trying to protect yourself. Your image is the important one, the successful one, the one who matters. He looked around the hallway, at Mom crying, at Dad's guilty expression, at the strangers who had watched him publicly humiliate his war hero sister. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you deal with the consequences of your choices. 3 months later, those consequences became clear. The State Bar of Texas launched an ethics investigation into Daniel's conduct during the trial. Attempting to access classified information through unofficial channels, using investigators to probe military secrets, presenting misleading testimony about classified operations, it all added up to serious professional misconduct. His law firm quietly asked him to resign rather than face partnership review. His reputation in legal circles was destroyed. The golden child had tarnished beyond repair. Mom tried to reach out several times, but her calls felt hollow. She wanted forgiveness without accountability, reconciliation without acknowledging what she'd done wrong. Dad made one genuine attempt at an apology. He showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening, hat in hand. I failed you, he said simply. As a father, as a man. I let fear of confrontation turn me into a coward. It was the first real thing he'd said to me in years. I can't undo what I did, he continued. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I was just too weak to say it when it mattered. I didn't forgive him that night. Maybe someday I would. But at least he'd finally told the truth. Raphael was the only family member who came through unchanged. He'd seen the ugliness up close and chosen a side, the right side. I'm done with family politics, he told me over coffee. You're the only one who ever had any integrity. The $300,000 inheritance cleared 2 weeks after the court ruling. But the money felt secondary to something much more valuable, the knowledge that I had stood up for myself and won. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to light the way forward. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect, because this story isn't over yet. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Austin, reviewing business plans for Phoenix Path, the non-profit I'd decided to create with Grandma Rosa's inheritance. The idea had come to me during one of those sleepless nights after the court victory. I kept thinking about what Grandma Rosa had really wanted: to honor service, to recognize sacrifice, to help people who had given something of themselves for others. She hadn't just left me money. She'd left me purpose. Phoenix Path was designed to help women veterans transition back to civilian life. Not just with job training or benefits navigation, but with the deeper stuff: finding identity beyond the uniform, dealing with family relationships that had changed, rebuilding confidence after military service. I'd experienced all of it firsthand. The coffee shop door chimed, and Naomi Blake walked in. She'd taken early retirement after our court testimony made her something of a celebrity in veteran circles. Now she was my business partner and closest friend. "How are the applications looking?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "Overwhelming. We've got 50 women wanting to join the first cohort, and funding for maybe 20. Good problems to have." She was right. 6 months ago, I'd been fighting for my reputation in court. Now I was building something that could actually change lives. My phone buzzed. A text from Raphael: "Saw the news story about Phoenix Path. Grandma Rosa would be proud." So am I. The news story had run in the Houston Chronicle the day before. Local veteran turns court victory into mission of service. It featured a photo of me at our office space, surrounded by the first group of Phoenix Path participants. The reporter had asked if I regretted the court battle with my family. "I regret that it was necessary," I'd answered. "But I don't regret standing up for the truth." Another text came in, this one from an unknown number: "Saw your story. Proud to know someone with your courage. Colonel Martinez." These were the relationships that mattered now. People who had earned their place in my life, not claimed it through blood relation. That evening, I was locking up the Phoenix Path office when I saw a familiar car in the parking lot. Dad's old Ford pickup. He was leaning against the tailgate, looking older than I remembered. "Hi, Sienna." "Dad. What are you doing here?" "Wanted to see what you'd built with Rosa's money." I gestured toward the building. "It's a program for women veterans. Helping them transition to civilian life." He nodded slowly. "That's good. That's what she would have wanted." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Your mother misses you," he said finally. "I'm sure she does. She knows she made mistakes during the trial. She made choices, Dad. So did you." "I know." He looked down at his boots. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I realize I spent so many years being afraid of conflict that I forgot how to stand up for what's right. Even when what's right was my own daughter. It was progress, but it wasn't enough. Not yet." "What about Daniel?" Dad's expression darkened. "Daniel's dealing with his own problems. Lost his job, reputation's shot, facing possible criminal charges for trying to access classified information." I felt a flicker of sympathy, then pushed it away. Daniel had made his choices too. He keeps asking if you'd be willing to talk to him. Why? I think he finally understands what he destroyed. Not just your relationship, but his own life. That's not my responsibility to fix. Dad nodded. No, it's not. But maybe someday, family should be about second chances. After he left, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about second chances and whether they were earned or given. My phone rang. "Naomi. You okay? Saw your dad's truck in the lot." "Yeah. Just family stuff." "The good kind or the bad kind?" "The complicated kind." She laughed. "The only kind that matters." Maybe that was true. Maybe real family wasn't about blood or loyalty or keeping peace at any cost. Maybe it was about showing up when it mattered, standing for truth even when it hurt, and earning your place through actions, not birthright. Phoenix Path was proof that sometimes the best family is the one you choose to build. 1 year later, I'm standing in front of a room full of women veterans at our first annual Phoenix Path graduation ceremony. 23 women who walked through our doors broken, angry, lost, or forgotten. 23 women who are walking out today with jobs, confidence, and something even more important, the knowledge that their service mattered. When I started this program, I tell them, I thought it was about helping you transition to civilian life. What I learned is that it was really about all of us reclaiming our stories. In the back of the room, Naomi wipes away tears. Raphael sits in the front row, beaming with pride. Colonel Martinez flew in from Washington to speak at the ceremony. These are my chosen family now. Mom and Dad aren't here. We've exchanged a few polite texts over the past year, but the relationship is still fragile, still healing. Maybe someday it will be more. Maybe it won't. I've learned that I can't control other people's choices, only my own. Daniel isn't here either. He's facing federal charges for his attempts to access classified information. His legal career is over. His marriage fell apart when the scandal hit the newspapers. He's learned the hard way that actions have consequences. Part of me feels sorry for him. But a bigger part remembers that he chose this path when he decided destroying me was worth whatever it cost. After the ceremony, I drive to Grandma Rosa's grave. It's become a ritual for me, updating her on Phoenix Path's progress. We helped 47 women this year, Grandma, I tell her headstone. Next year we're expanding to 3 cities. The wind picks up, rustling the flowers I brought. Thank you for seeing me when nobody else did. Thank you for believing my service mattered. I place my hand on the stone, feeling the warmth from the afternoon sun. Most of all, thank you for teaching me that family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shares your values. As I walk back to my car, my phone buzzes with messages from Phoenix Path graduates, Naomi, Raphael, fellow veterans I've met through the program. People checking in, sharing victories, asking for advice, offering support. This is what family looks like when you build it on truth instead of obligation. Your scars, your survival, your truth, they're stronger than anyone's doubts. Drop a comment if you've ever had to stand up to family lies, and subscribe for more stories where betrayal meets justice. Because sometimes, the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of what others tried to destroy.